Hello, Hapag High School community. It is May something, May 27th, Wednesday, May 27th. We are 76 days into our journey, virtually connecting with one another. And we are here today at another Wellness Wednesday experience. We're excited to again be joined by James Gallagher, Shannon Griffin, Colleen Raffini, Joy Ferrara, Annie Huang, Christy Pagliari, and Joe Whitehorse. All right, and we will get into the work of the day. Really excited about continuing to have practices that ground us and center us, and we'll go from there. So, Mr. Gallagher, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cutt. So it's good to be with you again, Hapag community. This week, we were going to offer a few slides around context for our practices this week. So really what our theme will be around, both in the practices I'll take us through and an excellent presentation Mr. Feeney has put together, is just this idea around the connection between physical sensations in our body and the information that they provide for our emotions. And this is something that for most of us, we often overlook or don't access that information. So in this first image, you see two images of a butterfly. On the left, it's hazy, it's not clear. And what we want to do with our practice around intentionally connecting into physical sensations is move more towards this image on the right, which is to say, increase the contrast, get more vivid around what is happening for us emotionally. Because often if we're stuck too much in our heads, in the thinking, and why do I feel this way? How do I feel? We stay in that left side image, that fuzzier image. And let's just take a moment actually to see if that is true for ourselves. And the way we'll do that is just very quickly, just kind of ground your body, meaning just maybe feel your feet flat on the floor. And you can lower your gaze or close your eyes. And I'm going to ask that you just bring to mind a person that you've not seen in a long time, given our quarantine. Just bring that person to mind. See them smiling, hear them laughing. And then can you sense anywhere physically that you feel something in your body as you bring that image to mind? And then maybe you can just say in your mind, I will see you soon, and kind of opening the eyes, raising the gaze. And what we just did is actually demonstrated in a study that was done around 700 people, similarly being asked to think about images, read emotional stories, look at movie scenes. And in this next slide, we see what they recorded. The red and the yellows are places where the individuals colored in on a little drawing of a body, intense emotions. The blues and the blacks were more of a numbing or a loss of sensation in the body. And I'll just give a moment for folks just to scan the emotion word that the image or story represented and where the participants in the study felt it in their bodies. And as always, these practices are just about reminders. So we may think of this like, yeah, when I get a little fearful, I can feel in my chest, my heart beating faster, or maybe if I feel some anger, I can feel that kind of tensing in my shoulders and down into my fists. Or the happier sensations, things like pride, a kind of a brightness in the chest. We want to really, on purpose, pay attention to those physical sensations to inform our emotions. let's try a little practice. In this next slide, you'll see that there are really two ways to practice, whether we call it mindfulness or just increased awareness. There's a dedicated practice, which is essentially like that time in the gym or that time on the treadmill or in the rehearsal studio. And then there is this integrated practice, whether that's on the playing field or on the stage. So I want to offer both this week. So the first, we'll do a dedicated practice. So you'll see in this next slide, there's an image of what we call a body scan. So what we're going to do is maybe for about 90 seconds, we're going to pay attention on purpose to the physical sensations in our body. And that's something you can come back to. You can play this video again. And then I'll close with a micro practice for when we have even less than just the 90 seconds. But let's play with this idea of a body scan. So if you will, just again, finding a comfortable posture, whatever that means to you, including lying down. And then just kind of feeling where your body contacts the floor. Maybe that's your feet on the floor or your back if you're laying down. And you can lower your gaze, close your eyes, or keep your eyes open. And I'll just say, if kind of sensing into your body isn't comfortable for you for whatever reason, that's totally fine. You can just rest your attention on the sounds in the room. If you want to play with the body scan, let's just do so for about 1.5 minutes. So first, just bring your attention to the top of your head. Rarely ever do we think about the physical sensations on the top of our head. Do we notice any itching, any warmth or tingling? And then almost like a flashlight of attention, let's shine that flashlight down the front of our face, into our forehead, into the brow. You notice any tension or maybe straining? If so, just bring a little relaxation to your forehead. And then sliding that flashlight of attention down into your eyes. Notice how your eyes feel. Is there any itching, any burning, sensing tired? And then bringing that spotlight of attention down into the jaw. Notice, is your jaw relaxed or maybe a little tense? If so, just bring some relaxation to your jaw. And then lastly, just bringing some awareness into the throat. Just noticing if you feel open, or maybe some constriction. Again, just relaxing. And then as we close this dedicated practice, you can just bring your attention back to an anchor, whether that was the sounds in the room, or maybe the body breathing. And I'll just invite a soft bell before I introduce our micro practice. When you no longer hear the bell, you can raise your gaze or open your eyes. And then you can just bring a little silly wiggle into the body if you like. That may have been a first time to kind of pay attention like that. I have to say, it's particularly important nowadays as we're all on computers. We're literally in a virtual head world. We might stand up, our legs are asleep, our backs are aching. So just taking these moments to clue into the physical sensation. Can be very helpful to give us information around the emotional state as well as our physical state. So with that, I will transition over to Mr. Feeney, who's going to take us a little bit more deeply, and then I'll close on the other side of Mr. Feeney's presentation with a micro practice connected to the body scan.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, James, for taking us through that micro practice and helping us to tune in to how our emotional state might impact us physiologically. It's so important to understand that things like stress or anxiety or depression or anger or frustration might impact us physically as well as emotionally. And in addition to lending this important awareness to us, what can we use this information for? I'd like to use anxiety as an example. If we can understand how our anxiety impacts us physically, we can better help to manage it more efficiently. So I'd like to display my screen to give you an example. Okay, so if we look at an episode of anxiety, typically it's not like we're feeling calm and relaxed 1 minute and then suddenly we feel like we're on the verge of a panic attack. Oftentimes it builds up more gradually. So just for an example's sake, it may look like first we may feel a sense of restlessness, which could show itself as tapping our feet or our legs shaking or tapping a pen on the desk. Then it may escalate to having difficulty concentrating. It's difficult to really focus when your mind is racing with anxiety producing thoughts. Then we may experience stomach issues, which is a very common physical manifestation of anxiety and often leads to more anxiety for the person experiencing it. Then we may feel weak or tired. And by this, I really mean a profound weakness or fatigue, like to the point where it's hard to get yourself motivated to even do anything. Sweating is very common because, again, what anxiety brings us into this fight or flight mode. And in terms of our bodies preparing us for that, one of the ways it does that is to increase our body's temperature. So that may result in sweating. And finally, oftentimes for people, the peak of this episode is where it feels like your heart is beating out of your chest. It could almost feel like you're having a heart attack, but it is simply a panic attack. So what's important for me to note is that people may have different symptoms. I'm just giving an example. These may, if you deal with anxiety, your symptoms may present themselves in different ways. And also the order of your symptoms may be different than what I've presented. And that's really the point, is to understand your body and your body's physical signs so you can try to catch it and address it at the earliest moment possible. If we can address or anxiety at its early stages, the first physical signs that we feel of it, we can really access and utilize our strategies or those tools that we have in our toolbox most effectively. These narrow as we go up the scale. It's as we get more and more anxious, it's just more difficult for us to think about what strategies we have available. And also they're not quite as effective or impactful up at the peak of our anxiety as they would be lower on that scale. The good news is, even if we do nothing at all, our anxiety will come to the other side of this chart and decrease. However, if we can catch it at its earliest signs, we can certainly minimize the duration as well as the intensity of the episode. And I think that would be everybody's goal, to minimize that period of discomfort that one feels when experiencing anxiety. So I'd like to note also, this can be used not just for anxiety, but when you're feeling anger or frustration or depression. If you can recognize the earliest physical signs within your body and utilize strategies at that point, you're going to lessen the duration and the intensity of that episode. So that's all I have. I just want to thank Hog for really recognizing how important it is for us to be taking care of ourselves emotionally as well as physically at this time. Thank you.
James, I have a question with regards to the body scan, and you brought up a slide that had different feelings. In particular, I happened to notice it was the deeper feelings of maybe love and anger in the chest area, right? So my question is, while you're going through the body scan, can you self-talk your way from one emotion into a different emotion? Does that make sense?
It does. I would say, I mean, I'm tempted to first ask if you've had an experience doing that.
You can ask me that question. I'm happy to share that.
I'm going to access that temptation and say, what has been your experience in trying to maybe do some self-talk through the body scan?
So I have practiced biofeedback at times. A very good friend of mine is a hypnotherapist and has shared some, small practices with me. I'm not a person who is comfortable in the emotion of anger. So there have been times that I have tried to kind of recognize it, name it, recognize it, and then kind of talk logically through that emotional state. So I'm wondering if that is something that others could do through the body scan if they're feeling a particular way, where perhaps there's some kind of conversation to have. That's my question.
Yeah. My experience would be the self-talk, at least piece, would just be like naming the physical sensations. Oh, there's a constriction in my chest. There's warmth in the back of my neck. And just naming the physical stuff to bring the kind of thinking brain online, regardless of the emotion, whether it's love, whether it's anger. Just really just extension of the noting practice, noting the physical sensations, and that distance can be what is the emotional regulation tool. Like, I'm stopping short of saying you can take anger and transition it into love, but at a minimum, by naming it and focusing on the physical sensation instead of layering on all the, I'm so angry at him because of X, Y, and Z, it's an emotion regulation tool just by naming the sensations.
I have a question for Mrs. Ruffini or Mrs. Griffin or James, Shannon, Colleen. So if a person, a student, or an individual comes and talks about not feeling good, how do you help that individual really kind of differentiate the difference between the physical not feeling good and the emotional not feeling good. Or maybe Annie, whoever wants to jump in, just unmute yourself because I don't see anybody raising a hand.
So Joy, I guess I'll start. I think very often our emotional duress manifests itself in very physical symptoms. And I think as a society, we're much more comfortable with that. So I think, the awareness is so important, because I think on so many levels, people are more comfortable with the idea that they're having a stomach ache or they're having a headache, or that there's something sort of physical, not that they feel comfortable, but that it's easier to describe it. And so I think first acknowledging that's very common for people to have that reaction, and then helping people to maybe put that connection together, that like what is motivating those physical symptoms can very often be more of what is emotional and what they're kind of feeling overwhelmed with in the moment.
So is it important then for a student who has anxiety to, if maybe their first symptom could be that pit in their stomach, to recognize that it's really a symptom of anxiety versus, stomach virus, right? And that maybe the strategy is to kind of talk themselves or get themselves to calm down before they climb up that arc that Colleen spoke of.
Absolutely. I think that awareness is so important. I don't think we lend enough credence to how our emotions impact us physically. So I think having that awareness, again, how you would address that would be very different if you recognize that that stomach ache or that discomfort was due to anxiety, and you thought about the strategies that you have to manage anxiety. Whereas if you felt it was a stomach virus, you wouldn't think to incorporate those strategies.
Annie, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, just drawing from personal experience, with the feeling of anxiety, right? And so, like Shannon said, it's almost, it's okay in our society to talk about, oh, I have a stomach ache, or to discuss the physical symptoms separate from the emotional, component, and not making that connection. And, for me, personally, dealing with, my own anxiety, right? And to catch that, like what James was saying, earlier, you have to note it, you have to recognize, you have to, see those symptoms and take a pause and realize. And just another example, this Sunday, Monday, I was, having a lot of difficulties managing the anxiety, and whatever the reason, the causes, or whatever it was, the physical sensations was so much that it was very difficult to breathe. It was the heart palpitations, all the things that Colleen, you had mentioned in your arc, right? The restlessness, right? First started with the restlessness, then the feeling of there's just something. I was warm, I was hot, I was starting to and then it builds. And James's graphic of what we look like when we are dealing with those kinds of emotions, like obviously we've gone through the SIY training with James, so I remember that graphic. And I'm like, okay, this is what's happening in my body right now. Why am I feeling this way? But let me first, right, recognize that this is happening in my body. And then the next thing that Shannon was talking about was helping people connect the physical sensations with what's going on emotionally. But a lot of times we leap to the emotional part, we leap to the cognition part, and try to fix the problem, where a lot of times we just need to take a few moments, right, to return our body to a neutral state. Then we're better able to cognitively and emotionally deal with whatever it is that we're dealing with. So that's just from my personal experience. So I don't know if James has other things that you can add.
Annie, I just want to say to you that, I admire your ability to actually name it and say it out loud. Not I believe, you know, in our role at the high school that not all of our students have become self-actualized and wonder why they don't feel good all of the time because they haven't named it. And maybe, James, you could speak to that a little bit as well.
Yes, happy to. And thank you everyone for sharing. I think the first thing that comes to my mind as we talk about these practices and tools for managing our emotions is that they are one part of this process. The other process can be, it's too overwhelming for me to manage my emotions on my own. And at that point, I need to reach out for help, whether that's talking to a parent or a friend or a professional. So I just wanted to name that. Yes, we are offering tools to help us navigate, particularly this crazy time we're in, but also want to very much normalize and speak to the benefit of getting help beyond just what we do on our own. With that said, I think the piece I wanted to add was first to emphasize what Ms. Raffini said around the importance of the sequence of the physical sensations, meaning our emotions happen in our body first, before our brain even says, oh, you're really mad, or you're really hurt, you're really disrespected. So that physical sensation first is an opportunity before your brain gets taken away on the emotional ride. So that's one. The other piece is all of this can be broken down, in my opinion, to this idea of I am not my emotions. And the physical sensations helps that. Let's just focus on anger quickly. If someone hurts my feelings, my brother or sister has just gotten on my last nerve, I might get angry and I say, I am angry, and I'm going to respond based on that anger. If over time, with these practices, when my brother or sister gets on my last nerve, I might say, whoa, my chest is tightening up. I'm literally making kind of clenched fist. And when I bring my attention to those physical sensations, I'm accessing that space before I kind of respond or react out of that emotion, and rather maybe can kind of manage a little bit on how I'm going to respond. So to not oversay it, this idea of I am not my emotions. The physical sensations helps us kind of solidify that.
Thank you so much for that. Does anyone have a question with regards to this conversation that we've been having, or would like to contribute something? Just unmute yourself and jump.
Just in following up, it was interesting. I was listening to a webinar last week, and one of the things that they were talking about in that is to James's point, that for kids, very often they don't know how to explain the emotional, but they do know how to explain the physical. So I do think it's important for parents, especially, to recognize, especially in times like this, that kids' symptoms may come out in very physical ways. And those may be the ways that your kids are communicating, and for us in the school as well, that something doesn't feel right to them, because they may not know, especially little kids, they may not know the words to use. And even in the bigger, in the older grades, I think sometimes kids just don't know the words to use, but they can tell you some of those other things. So it's important to sit with them too, and help them to understand like what that physical means, and help to give them some understanding and some words to use to help them to better explain why maybe they're having the symptoms that they're having.
Shannon, thank you so much for that. And maybe our team can come up with some formulaic question. Unless you have anyone has some questions to jump in, but I think it would be helpful for parents or caregivers to be able to ask some deeper questions if their youngster says, hey, I'm not feeling good, I have a stomach ache, I'm not getting out of bed, I just feel really, really tired. but maybe there are some other questions to follow up and ask, that I think that would be helpful. If anyone has a thought on that, please jump in.
I just had a quick thing about that. I think we have to be careful about the language that we use. A lot of our younger, students don't, like Ms. Griffin said, don't have the language necessary to describe, what they're feeling. And we also should probably be mindful about, how much weight we lend to words like anxiety and depression, right? Because we've been, using these, words, and our kids are hearing these words, quite often, but not necessarily knowing exactly how those words translate within their own selves, right? And so maybe, like Ms. Ferrara says, a little bit of more resources provided to our, families would be helpful, so that we could all learn together, what it means to feel anxious, what it means to be angry, what it means to feel disappointed, etc., and what that feels like.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any thoughts or questions that they would like to
Yeah.
put out?
I'll jump in for a second. I think these lunches, the conversations we have, the work we do on a weekly basis, continues to be points of clarity for me, that our language that we've put forth into the community, that our job at Hauppauge High School is to prepare students for the world beyond, is really the mindset that I think is important to be thinking about. And part of that is continuing to think about our own lives as like we're shaping them every second. We're thinking about ourselves every second, and to be cognizant of that journey, that within each of us, we are constantly kind of wrestling with where we are, where we want to be. And my own experience as a teenager was that it always felt like life was coming at me. And then how do you stand and position yourself to kind of take the step or the action that you truly want to take and that matches with who you are? This is a very abstract and challenging concept, but I think if we can reframe and have the perspective that math test isn't the most important thing, that sports experience isn't the most important thing, how you as a human being sit in whatever occurs and absorb and then think through what your next right move is the important thing always. So what our right next action step is always kind of the space we have to get back to. That's a tremendously complicated thing maybe for a young person to be thinking about, but that global perspective of what we're doing, I think, is sensible to bring back into the fold here, especially when we're using heavy words like anxiety and depression, because it is all about the continuity of development as a human being.
If you don't mind, I'll jump in for a second. I like the idea of naming the emotion and starting with that and not jumping to the problem. And I think that's particularly important right now, because right now there are many problems that we can't fix and that are not easily fixed. But if we prepare ourselves and identify how we're feeling, we are going to be more prepared in how our response. And I think, there's always going to be problems in life, but you can prepare yourself better for how you respond to them. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, because I think it also speaks to, rather than constantly reacting to situations, like you had said when you were a teenager, it just felt like life was happening to you. It puts you a little more in the driver's seat and allows you to be proactive and decide, yes, I can't control this or this, but I can control how I'm choosing to respond to it.
Yeah, and I think if we can think back to this last week with naming it and the clouds, I just love that announcement so much, and actually helped me work through some stuff. And I think we all are recognizing, Hauppauge community, that we are all feeling overwhelmed for one reason or another during this time, and we all have some kind of level of fear or anxiousness, right? But through our practice of being aware and being able to name it, like for example, I went into the grocery store last week and I was wearing my mask. Someone was coming at me with their part, just going about our own shopping, wearing a mask, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, they're not 6 feet away. And I started to feel a little bit anxious. And then, you talk yourself through that. Okay, you'll be fine. It's not going to last. They're not, coming over for dinner or whatever the case is, but not light of it. But there are things that we need to remember. It will pass.
All right, I'm going to jump in, Joy. Thank you for facilitating the Q&A. Colleen, thank you again so much for leading us in the work today. And Mr. Gallagher, thank you again. James, thank you for really kind of helping us create an arc to these conversations. I do think, I'm grateful that we're going to have this set of conversations. Certainly they were influenced by what's going on now, but the themes and the energies within the conversations will be something that we will have now to kind of ground us and guide us as we are thinking about leading in this space. It is mind-blowing to me that it's 2020 before schools are kind of really thinking through how to intertwine a lot of this into the practice of an everyday school experience. And think that coming out of this, whenever we return to school, we may be positioned to offer more to our students at HOPOG, but also broadly about how we think about our emotions and we think about ourselves and we think about events happening to us that I'm excited for. So, Mr. Gallagher, if you want to take us home from here, thank you so much.
Yes, I'll also offer some gratitude for being and learning with the HOPOG High School community. Thank you for the insights everyone shared. I will end us with a micro practice that connects back into that body scan. I'm actually going to use the example Ms. Ferrara just shared. So this micro practice is called the head, body, heart check-in. So let's say we only have a few breaths where we want to access a tool like this. I'm going to borrow Ms. Ferrara's example of we're walking into a grocery store. And let's say we see someone coming towards us that we maybe are not comfortable with. The first thing, we take a breath and go to our head. What thoughts are there? Well, I'm a little anxious. Maybe I'm fearful. We're living in this uncertain world. Can I catch this? And just seeing that. Then into the body very quickly. Oh, I'm holding the cart a little bit more tightly. My shoulders are up by my ears. Okay, that's just giving us a few moments. And then lastly, to the heart. What are my intentions? How do I want to behave? Maybe I don't want to say anything offensive. I'm going to just maybe, to serve myself, move my cart and myself a few feet over. And you can do that in just 3 breaths. So let's just try that as we close. I'll guide us again. You can lower your gaze, keep your eyes open or close them completely. And the micro practice to maybe try one time today is when you feel a little emotion coming on, take a breath and just go to your head and name the thoughts that are present. Then take a breath and go to your body and what physical sensations are present. Heart beating faster, warmth, constriction. And then finally, before you react, just think about how you want to respond. What intentions do you want to hold? Self-protection, kindness towards others. And see if those few breaths can just inform one interaction later on today. With that, we can raise our gaze or open our eyes, hopefully locked in that micro practice. I invite you to just play with it later today. See if it helps. Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. I'll turn it back over to you. Close us.
All right. Thanks, guys. I think that's it. We'll see you next week. We'll be posting these. Keep staying tuned, and we'll get them to you in a variety of ways. Really grateful for this group of people. Thank you so much, everybody. Peace out, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.